Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome back to another episode of the State of the Program series brought to you by the Crossover U College Hoops Talk podcast. Again, like we talked about in our first two episodes, this is a series we're doing specifically in the offseason in college basketball every year where we talk about what programs have added, what they've lost, and how they're really just stacking up, how they look going into the next season. So today on this episode, we're going to be talking about the reigning national champions, that being the Florida Gators. Incredible run they just went on, just insane. You had the legend of Walter Clayton Jr. being the Final Four most outstanding player, Todd Golden kind of elevating himself in the pantheon of current college coaches. And they've done a lot this offseason. And we're going to talk all about that in this episode today. But before we get into that, if you like this podcast or anything else you see on this channel, please engage with our content any way you can, whether it's liking our videos, subscribing to our channel, or just telling other people about it. It really does help with growing what we do here at the Crossover. So let's get right into it. The Florida Gators have lost a good amount. In terms of the losses which they could have controlled, they did a fair job in not really losing all too much. Of course, they lost Walter Clayton Jr., Elijah Martin, and Will Richards, which was the bulk of their scoring this past season. Walter averaged 18 a game, Elijah Martin 14, and Will Richard 13. So a lot to replace in that realm. But again, those guys were out of eligibility. There's nothing they could have done with those three guys. In terms of the losses, which they could have controlled, those guys were Sam Alexis, Denzel Aberdeen, and Kajis. I can't really pronounce his last name, so I apologize to Cadiz on that. But I think the worst loss of the three was definitely Denzel Aberdeen. He's a guy who played 20 minutes a game this past year. And if he were to come back, he easily could have been the starting point guard, I believe. Maybe they would have had to go out and get the likes of someone like an Xavier Lee, nor Boogie Fland, which we're going to touch on in just a second. Denzel probably could have played 30 minutes a game and added to the lore that that just kind of is this Florida Gators program right now. But they were able to get a lot of guys back. I'll let Josh talk a little bit about how he feels in terms of what Florida lost.
I honestly think it's not the worst in the world. Listen, losing your top two scores does suck. I think that does take them a bigger hit on where I put them score rise, which if you have been following to the program, we rank things out of 10, 10 being the best case scenario, 1 being the worst. Personally, I'd probably give them more of a 7 just because you are losing like some for your top two scorers. You're losing guys like Aberdeen, who would likely be a starter. It's not the worst thing in the world. These guys were likely going to leave anyway, but Aberdeen. But at the same time, replacing the talent is always a tricky thing, even for a guy like Todd Goldberg.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, I also had Florida as a 7. Again, like I just talked about, the losses which they could have controlled weren't too detrimental to what their roster makeup is going to be going into this next season. But it is hard to ignore how much scoring they are losing between the three guards they had in the backcourt this past season. So I think that definitely it's hard to ignore, like I just said, and kind of bumps them down a few points for me. Now, getting into what Florida's added, I think the number one theme necessarily wasn't what they added, but what they got back. They definitely could have lost all three of these guys to either the transfer portal or the NBA draft. Specifically, the draft are both Thomas Howe and Alex Condon. Those are two guys who were mocked in some mock drafts to potentially be first round picks. There were some lottery rumors for Thomas Howe, although I don't know how strong the truth was in some of those rumors. But again, those guys both could have been first round picks, but decided to run it back in Gainesville for another season. Todd Golden came out and said both those guys know what the money is, what the offer is NIL wise, and if they'd love to have him back. And they were able to get both of them back. I definitely felt Thomas Howe for a long time. I definitely felt he was going to come back. Condon definitely was a little iffy. Early on, I felt maybe he stays in the draft as it kind of went on in the process. I definitely think it was probably the best decision to go back to school. Ruben Chinilu, they easily could have lost the transfer portal, but he decided to stick around. I'm sure what he's getting in NIL is going to help. But with him deciding to stay in Gainesville, but getting those three guys back to play in your front court, I would assume all three of those guys start, which we're going to talk about in our projected starting lineup in a second. But to have those three guys back, just the amount of size and length and experience that those three guys are going to bring is so important what Florida is going to do next season. And I'll let Josh talk about what they've added in terms of the backcourt.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're going to talk about it, and I do want to also mention these three guys that are starting, that, in previous years, all three guys were left. They would have went to the draft. They would have been
Right.
first, maybe late second rounder picks. NIL has changed things. Golden's a very convincing guy. There's also desire to win that second natty. We've seen how this works out. It's honestly really great for the sport as a whole. That said, what Florida is getting in the offseason in their backcourt, and honestly, to some extent in their front court, is very, very useful. The biggest transfer is Xavier Lee, in my opinion. He was great at Princeton for his few years there. He honestly should have transferred a year prior, but this is probably the best time. He's going to be a all-around starter, possibly an All-American in his time in Florida, which will be very useful. It's probably the best place that a guy from the Ivy League can go to. SEC is probably not as physical as other conferences, which probably would have tore up the guy. He's not the biggest dude, very, very skinny type of player, but fits well in this style. Also taking up Boogie Flan, who kind of like the other guys, went to the transfer portal, tested the draft waters. People thought he was going to leave. He would have left 5 years ago. Comes back, automatic starter. Makes Florida a huge, huge jump in the rankings. And then beyond that, A.J. Brown, who will not start, will likely be a six-man type of candidate, fits such a great, great background point guard role. He can come off the bench really any time of the game, I feel. He could be a starter for injuries. He would just fill that open gap that I think a lot of teams are missing, which really makes Florida incredibly deep. They did keep guys like Hamilton, and they could possibly bring in Oliver Rowe, who did redshirt. This is the 7'9" guy you probably see in his times. I don't think he's going to contribute much, but to have the tall, paint blocking guys that Florida could use in their front court is massive. So if you're going to ask me, I'm probably giving this like a 9, maybe even 10 on the additions because Florida went from like 20th to like 3 on
Right.
most rankings as soon as they got these transfers.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely with you there. I think they're either a 9 or a 10. I might have them at a 9 just because I feel like there are some questions in the backcourt. Just like you mentioned, you don't know how Xavier Lee is going to translate to the high major level. He took a lot of tough shots in the Ivy League at Princeton in his 3 years that he played there, 2 years starting. And now those shots are only going to get tougher in the SEC. You mentioned the skinny frame. I definitely like the fit of him going to the SEC rather than what the fit would have been had he chosen St. John's in the Big East because of the lower levels of physicality that you see in the SEC.
Same thing in the Big Ten as well.
Right.
Like the SEC is, it's not that it's a weaker, tougher league in terms of physicality. It's just that the level of playmaking is more towards passing the ball and scoring outside the paint than rather being inside the paint and relying off of that 2-point ends paint shot, which I don't think would have worked for a guy like at St. John's.
Exactly.
Lee is more of a 3 and D guy, not that 2-point style that is run by Patino.
And just another thing that worries me a little bit is it's tough to ignore in the early stretches of SEC play for Arkansas in this past season when Boogie Fland was healthy. Arkansas started 0-5, and then the second Boogie Fland gets hurt and goes down with the injury for a fair duration of time for in their season. Arkansas was able to kind of figure things out in the rotation. Other guys like Nelly Davis, Carter Knox, DJ Wagner were kind of in more defined roles and were able to kind of get going as opposed to what it was during that 0-5 stretch. And so that slightly worries me a little bit. But again, he's a really talented playmaker, really talented scorer. And I definitely think you can make the argument that Florida has a top 3 backcourt in the country, maybe top 5 going into next season. So I would probably have him at a 9 just because of the concerns I have regarding both Fland and Xavier. To get on to coaching, I mean, I have a tough time seeing this really any lower than a 10, just with the job Todd Golden did in the NCAA tournament, really becoming kind of the analytics darling of college basketball, and how him and his staff really combine the knowledge from both basketball heads and what the nerds are saying in their stats department. It's really interesting to see. It's almost NBA style, the way that he coaches and runs his program. Everything they do, roster makeup, decisions in late games, like we saw with his execution in a lot of the games where they had to come back. It's really all just so fascinating the way how he just views both building the roster and again executing stuff in game. So again, you look at the job he did this past NCAA tournament, and just this kind of goes into vibes too. I mean, you're coming off a national championship and you build a roster that looks like it's good enough to potentially allow you to repeat. I think the coaching I would probably have as a 10 right now.
Definitely. I mean, the new golden path, as I'm probably going to is well underway in Florida. I think that he's really understood how the game is played. And he's redefining it. I mean, I don't really know how you put it. Like this is like, and this might turn some heads. I would probably throw this as the college basketball version of Moneyball. He's playing with that small ball style, but also trying to wrap around recruits and don't fit the full mold. I mean, they didn't really get the top recruits. They didn't keep all the guys, but they managed to keep what mattered, and they managed to bring in players that were somewhat on the radar or weren't really considered to come back. Like he's playing with possibilities, which Florida's great at. Florida is great at playing with the impossible. We saw that in their tournament last year, and I think that's a continuation of just their culture and their style. So yeah, I would put 10 in there. Golden's a top three coach right now.
Yeah. I mean, he's definitely, again, jumped a lot of names in the coaching pantheon of the current makeup of college basketball. And just before we get into how they stack up going to the SEC this next year, I'm just going to throw out my projected starting lineup for this Florida Gators program. I would say Boogie Flant starts at the one, Xavier Lee at the two, and then Howe, Condon, and Chinny Lou rounding out the front court. Josh, I'll ask you, I know your starting lineup is probably the same, but do you think there's any world where AJ Brown potentially breaks the starting lineup or somewhere someone like an
No.
Urban Clavzar?
As I mentioned earlier, he is probably, and I don't know if the SEC does this, but he should be the front runner for the sixth man of the year in the SEC. He averaged 13 points a game at Ohio. I get it. He doesn't fit the exact role for a starter. He is a little bit on the shorter side, and with a guy like Xavier Lee and Boogie Fland, those are higher rated prospects. But Brown fits the perfect role. Think of him like a Peyton Pritchard. He can be so useful, but doesn't need to play a lot. I really think that he's the type of guy that can come in, average 15, 20 minutes a game, or like and just have this like great presence on the court. Maybe a spot up shooting guard, maybe more of a point guard if need be. Like he fills that diverse role, which Florida's going to need a lot. I think that without Walter Clayton, that vacuum of clutch shooting kind of disappears from this team. And if you're going to really ask me, I think the biggest part of it would go to him.
Yeah. And I love how on multiple occasions you mentioned AJ Brown probably being the front runner of the SEC for a six-man award. I definitely think the names in this projected starting line kind of take a lot of attention away from the depth that this Florida team really has. AJ Brown, again, you mentioned 13, almost 14 points per game at Ohio this past year. He's a bigger guard, solid defender, can get to the basket. Not the most efficient shooter from outside, but again, he's able to get to the line. He's able to get paint touches and attack, put pressure on the rim. I think he has a chance to be one of the more underrated portal ads this offseason cycle and really fill a great glue guy role for this team. Potentially having the chance to play the role of a point of attack defender. Again, a guy who can put pressure on the rim. You have Urban Clavzar coming back, who shot the cover off the ball in SEC play this past year. You also have really talented freshmen coming in. Cornelius Ingram Jr. is a top 25 guy coming in. Alex Lloyd's in the top 40. I don't know how much either of those guys is going to play. I would assume Cornelius probably is able to get on the floor at some point just because of the talent he's coming in with.
Yeah,
But again, this
Cornelius is
Gators team
definitely.
is a lot deeper than most people think,
Yeah,
which kind of gets, yeah, go ahead.
sorry, my bad. Yeah, I think definitely a big note is how Golden will use his freshman talent. Once again, not going to likely start. I think they don't need to start. They are great prospects. I think Cornelius is probably the best of the two, plus international prospects being brought in. Don't really know where he's going to fit in the lineup right now or how many minutes he gets, but I think he's going to be probably one of the better freshmen in the SEC overall, especially considering that, there's still questions on Xavier Lee and Boogie Fland and how good they're going to be. If they need to get benched, I think it's a reason for Cornelius Fleming to step up in that role.
Right. Most definitely. And if an injury ever happens, then I don't think Florida's losing too much sleep over having to start one of those guys if Xavier or Boogie goes down with something. So to get into terms of where they stack up in the SEC next year, the SEC looks like it's going to be really competitive once again, could end up being the best conference for another second straight year. Right now, I definitely view Florida and Kentucky in a higher tier than the rest of the field in the SEC. I do have somewhat of a tough time determining who I kind of view higher than the other. I would maybe open up Florida as the favorite in the SEC to start the year, just because I feel like there's more answers than the questions Kentucky has in terms of starting lineup. I mean, there's several variations of Kentucky's starting lineup which they could end up rolling out, which we'll touch on in our State of the Program video for the Wildcats whenever that does come out. But again, Florida, I feel like there's a few more answers. You got a coach that has won a national championship at this point, knows how to get it done, has constructed a roster, which on paper looks like they could potentially do it again. And I think you do kind of give them the national championship benefit of the doubt boost there. I'll ask you, do you view them as a front runner in the SEC?
Not fully, because there is that Kentucky team. There are some background guys. I mean, the SEC is going to be the hardest conference play. We'll put that as a 10 right now, just for the sake of argument. Yeah, it'll be tough. It'll be tough because even last year in the middle of the season when we knew Florida was going to be a possible 1 seed, they didn't feel like the front runner. That was obvious. I think it could be a very similar thing to this year where Florida comes in as that top team, but they have to deal with so many different other good teams that it becomes a death by many cuts for them. Not
Right.
saying it will happen, but Auburn, Alabama, you could see like a Mississippi State, like teams that are going to rise from that middle of the list that could really play better ball in the later half, especially in conference play. Don't expect it, but I think this Florida team could succumb to insecurities and fall into that role. I know Kanaye was kind of mentioning the vibes. I would probably put vibes around a 10. You just came off a natty. You're the only team to do that, obviously, every year. I mean, you're coming back with an opportunity to do it again. I get it. UConn did that, 2 years ago, so it's not the newest thing on the block. But who doesn't want to go back to back? And who doesn't want to have the opportunity to go back to back as well? I think it's a huge deal for both Golden and Florida as a whole as a program.
Yeah, I mean, vibes in Gainesville, if we could, I would say maybe 11 or 12 out of 10. I mean, you're riding high off a national championship. You reload with a roster that looks really, really good on paper. You got guys who were mocked to potentially go in the first round, come back to school, fan favorites that are going to be coming back and keep the energy high. What you added, it looks really good in terms of you have three guys in the backcourt between Lee, Boogie, and Brown, who are all capable of doing stuff off the dribble. My only one concern, which kind of ties in maybe to coaching a little bit and maybe the roster construction, is I do wonder who is going to be that alpha late in game. There's no replacing Walter Clayton Jr., but you need someone to kind of fill that void of late in games. You need to make tough shots. Who's going to have the ball in their hands? At this very moment, I would probably say Boogie Flan, because I just feel like Howe is the guy that I think is probably the best NBA prospect on this roster right now and has a chance to, I think, be the potential All-American on this team. But again, he's kind of playing, he's a bigger three, could end up playing the four. We'll see what ends up going. We'll see what ends up going down with that. But that's not a guy you necessarily throw the ball to late in the clock or when you need a tough bucket to kind of just go and do it and make a play. I would say it's Boogie, but I could definitely see Xavier or AJ Brown, if he's on the floor, being in that type of position.
I agree with the Xavier argument. I think that if he really shows up in the way that he could, I mean, once again, he's the most questionable guy on this team. He's the big X factor. But Xavier Lee can be the best player at the best time in every game. He's shown a lot at Princeton. I think there's a translation there at Florida. If not, Boogie Flan's there. I think there's a possibility where AJ Brown becomes that, deep shooting three guy off the bench. He becomes the guy you need. Freshman talent, you could see Cornelius Fleming be that role. Like, I think there might not be an exact guy Kanaye, but rather a group of players that can run in the clutch in the high leverage situations, even if there's no exact player that manages to be the person over. Because Walter Clayton's irreplaceable. You can't get a guy who is so clutch to this. There's only so many guys that even exist at that level.
Right.
You don't need to be that. You can have a team that's just made to be clutch. Think kind of like the Pacers right now. Very clutch team. I get it. Halliburton kind of fits that clutch person role. You don't need to have that as Florida. You can have a group of players that just work in high leverage situations, which they're going to need. Conference play, you're going to have a lot of close games. Tournament, you're going to have a ton of close games. I really feel like this team is ready to win a natty. I don't know if they're going to, but they have all the pieces, if you're going to ask me.
Yeah, most definitely. I really like that take there where you're saying maybe it's not necessarily one guy, but a combination of guys who in different moments can step up and hit big shots. But nonetheless, the vibes are incredibly high out in Gainesville. The Gator boys stay hot. very much a Final Four contender and national championship contender on paper. Todd Golden, amazing job building this roster. But that's going to take care of everything we have for the State of the Program episode on the Florida Gators today. And until the next episode, we'll see you all next time.